Yes, Guyana to the world.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globespan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavors, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
Yeah, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight to discuss a very important subject matter, the elections of the United States of America that elected or re-elected former President Donald Trump. Before we get into that subject matter, let us first introduce the panelists for tonight. We have 4 gentlemen, all of whom are no strangers to this program. Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with Mr. Devin Bissoon as our technical operator for tonight. We have a very experienced moderator, Dr. Aspit Rose, professor of political science and social science subjects in the United States. Dr. Rose is no stranger to this program. He has been a moderator for several years. He's a regular feature almost every week, sometimes twice a week. And then we have Mr. Rusat Ram Gopal, who also has been a moderator in this program. Mr. Ram Gopal is a lawyer educated in London as well as in the United States. He was educated at King's College, University of London in London, and at Georgetown University, both places where he obtained the LLB and the LLM respectively. And we have Mr. Mike Singh, who is no stranger again, has appeared in this program multiple times. Mr. Singh is a global security expert. He's an ICT specialist. He's also a surrogate of Mr. Donald Trump, who was elected yesterday as President of the United States, the 47th President. And joining us later will be Mr. Timothy Jonas, a Senior Counsel in Guyana, General Secretary of ANUG, a New and United Party of Guyana. Mr. Jonas is again no stranger to this program, has appeared multiple times. Our topic tonight is the election of Mr. Donald Trump as president and his foreign policy towards Latin America, the Caribbean, and globally, internationally. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us to interrogate and discuss this very important, very interesting subject matter of what Mr. Trump's new foreign policy would be during his second term. Just to recap, Donald Trump was first elected as president in 2016, serving for 4 years until January 2021, when he was defeated in elections of November 2020 by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who was vice president. In yesterday's election, Kamala Harris was the nominee of the Democratic Party. All polls suggested a very, very close general elections. It turned out to be a blowout, was not even close in the electoral votes. And even in some of the actual statewide voting in several states, Donald Trump made significant gains, even in states that were usually traditionally very, very Democratic. So we will begin first with this concept of foreign policy. But before I do that, I would like to ask the esteemed gentlemen if they have any comments first about the election or re-election of Mr. Donald Trump. We'll ask the political scientist first, Dr. Askwith Rose. Dr. Rose?
Thank you, Dr. Bisram. And the election, in a democracy, is, of course, a person wins, 10 people contest, 2 people contest, they ought to be a winner. And fortunately for Trump last evening, he was the winner. I think going into last night's counting of the votes, I don't even think Trump himself knew that he was going to win. And the same for Kamala Harris. She went into the vote last night, counting the votes with the intention of winning. And she got defeated. And I'm, of course, disappointed, as you saw today in her statement, in her speech, concession speech. And Trump, I think himself, realized now that he has to work with everyone in the country. Donald Trump, by character, when he's people against him and attacking him, he becomes doggish. He will say things that out of the nowhere. But by now he won this election, I think he's gonna take a different approach to his administration and how to govern the country. No one now is attacking him or on an election. He won the election. So the next 4 years, we'll have to wait and see what happens. And I know for a fact that he got 291 electoral college votes compared to Kamala's 223. And the popular vote, he won it for the first time. So that's a plus for him. He did a very good campaign, even though it was based on character. I will give it a F when it comes to character. But other than that, he focused on what the people had needed, the economy. And I think that's what took him over to the top.
Okay, Rusat Ramgopal.
Thank you, Dr. Bisram. So I would begin, in addition to the background and bio you gave me, I was a Republican Party nominee for New York City Council, and I was also part of the the New York delegation of the Republican National Convention. So in terms of what the Trump victory means for Guyana in particular, or the Caribbean at large, I was able to get some foresight into this during my time at the Republican Convention. I was able to, for example, talk to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who many of your viewers would remember for his role in the 2020 elections crisis in Guyana and helping to seek a resolution to that, and also his visit to Guyana thereafter. And as a result of those conversations, I left of the opinion that a Republican victory this year would be very good for Guyana. I think that people like Secretary Pompeo, whether or not they return as Secretary of State, because there's talk of, for example, Marco Rubio becoming the Secretary of State, I think there'll be people surrounding the Trump administration who will have a great focus in Guyana, a great interest in Guyana, and importantly, a great knowledge of Guyana. One of the problems in the past is a lot of U.S. policymakers barely knew anything about Guyana or even how to pronounce Guyana. You'll have a big difference this time around. The people coming into the administration will, be familiar with Guyana to a greater extent than the past. It'll be good, in terms of the results. I think that one of the important things to look at in the immediate results is when a party gets a clear mandate, they're able to pursue their foreign policy in a much more efficient manner. And I think that that's going to be one of the results of the election we saw last night, that it wasn't a close election like 2020 or 2016. It was a much more clear mandate. I mean, the Republicans won the Senate, won the House, won the presidency, the popular vote, and the Electoral College. And I think it's a good thing for American democracy and global democracy that we had quick results. When you have a period of time where people don't know the results, that opens the room for conspiracy and disputes, which unfortunately we saw in America in 2020, and unfortunately we saw in Guyana in 2020. So I think that it's a good thing for American democracy that's back on track and having quick results to its elections, and America sets an example for the world. I think that'll be good for American foreign policy going forward. That that we had a quick resolution to our elections last night and a clear mandate for the winner. And noticeably, adding on to what Dr. Rose said, you aren't seeing as many attacks on President Trump as, say, you saw the first time around 2016. We're in New York. In 2016, New York, when Trump won, there was a massive protest the next day. People taking to the streets, protesting outside Trump Tower. You're not seeing that this time. There's no massive protest in New York or DC or any other major cities right now. I think that the American people have accepted the results, and that is a good thing. I've said my piece for now. I think I took a bit too long in the opening, but I'll move on to somebody else now.
Right. Before I get to Mike Singh, if I may just pitch in a little bit. For me, in observing this, even before the actual voting, I was amazed that the polls are saying the elections were going to be close in those 7 battleground states. Yet at the same time, the polls are also saying that Donald Trump was making significant gains in what were called the blue states, like in New York, New Jersey. The polls are suggesting that they were going to be close. Trump would not win, but he was making significant gains in those states, and therefore, how it could have been close in those 7 battleground states was very, very hard to understand. Nevertheless, as it turned out, Donald Trump won, I think, all 7 battleground states. Dr. Rose said it was 291. I think he has gotten 316 to Kamala Harris 221, 222 or thereabout. It was a huge victory, a blow in some sense, and it was a replication of what took place in 2016 when Trump shockingly won, I think by the same margin, 3-something against Hillary Clinton's 2-something. So, Mike Sings.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Last night, watching President Donald Trump at his facility there in West Palm Beach, the media brought home the world events that we are confronted by: the war in the Middle East, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and of course, Taiwan being threatened by mainland China, the Indo-Pacific region with the Quad+1. And many of these things are going to confront his presidency on January 20th. His inbox will be full of global challenges. How does President Trump respond, and what the consequences are likely to be? And I'm going to tell you what we can expect from a Trump 2.0 foreign policy. In defense and security policy, we can anticipate a return of peace through strength approach. This will mean big investments in U.S. defense capabilities to strengthen our global deterrence, and the use of force decisively if deterrence fails. Trump will rightly ask allies to contribute more to ensure U.S. alliances in Europe and Asia have the capabilities they need. On economic policy, we can expect a focus on fair and reciprocal trade, prioritizing the addressing of China's unfair trading practices, and in unleashing of the United States domestic energy potential. Values will center around an America first, but not alone orientation. That will ensure that U.S. global engagement benefits the peace, prosperity, and freedom of the American people, and in so doing, the broader free world. What this will mean for Latin America? Latin America and the Caribbean have no illusions. From the time of James Monroe to until today, it is America's backyard. Countries like Guyana will be forced to decouple from China. Will China and the United States go to war? Absolutely. It's not if, but when. China threatens the peace and stability of South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Taiwan Straits, and the Indo-Pacific Rim. China and the US will clash. They're going to clash in this half of the century or perhaps the other. We live in a multipolar world, and I can tell you the most important country that the United States will be courting for the next few decades will be that of India, because India will be the one country the United States has shared values with in Asia other than the ones of Korea and Taiwan and Japan.
Okay.
Many countries in Asia continue to be threatened. In Latin America, the Chinese are taking over large amounts of rare earth minerals that are extremely important for US competitiveness in the global economy in the areas of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, energy transition, the building of more robust and resilient energy infrastructure. Guyana has lots of those minerals. Guyana has lots of oil and gas, but the US will become a major producer, not only of oil and gas for domestic consumption, but also export. That will have a dramatic effect on the price of oil and gas coming out of Guyana. I believe the US will take a tough stand on Venezuela and Trinidad's so-called gas project. The Dragon project will never take place. That's what I want you to think about. And it's time the leaders of Guyana started having a hard look at themselves by beginning to cancel all those Chinese contracts and opening it up to fair bidding by US multinationals.
Well, you have given us a lot to discuss. I think we can focus on those issues and topics.
But those are the key things you're going to
Okay.
see.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. In our discussion and going forward, if we could be parsimonious, let's try to be brief as possible and specific and point. Joining us also tonight, who we didn't introduce earlier, is Mr. Timothy Jonas, no stranger to this program. Senior Counsel Timothy Jonas, thank you for joining us, sir, from ANUG. You're not here to represent ANUG, you're here to represent your own views. Thank you so much, sir. I was just giving you an introduction of your background of you. So, Timothy Jonas, your view on the election last night before we begin to talk about the substance of the topic of foreign policy.
I'm very sorry to be late. Thank you for having me, Vishnu. I have no internet in my house for some reason, and therefore had to use my phone's data, which changed the access to Skype, so I couldn't access, and the genius Devin helped me out in 5 minutes after I'd been struggling for 20 minutes. So thank you, Devin. The more I look at how democracies function in large countries, the more I come to the conclusion that politics in those large countries is more and more becoming about advertising, about sound bites, rather than about real issues and grasping the nettle and truly giving a position. I'm already convinced that the difference between Republican policies and Democratic policies, Democrat policies, are nuanced rather than polarized. They're quite similar. They both see socialism as evil, and therefore their approach economically and socially to things like welfare are not diametrically opposed, but are slightly different. Now, that being said, when you identify who your base is, part of the advertising and part of the use of sound bites is to use extreme language where you can to rally the base that you know is supporting you. So you saw Trump doing that with issues on abortion. On the flip side of the coin, where you are aware that a policy may be unpopular, especially unpopular with lobbyists or the folk who are funding you, you tend to direct your advertising to sound bites that really are meaningless and don't tie you to anything, which is what we saw Kamala do with the discussion on Israel and Palestine. The sad end result, really, I think, is that voters are left guessing and drawing inferences from the marketing sound bites rather than from real analyses and real information. And I think that's a tragedy that we are increasingly seeing. And the truth is, I don't know how to solve that.
Okay, and anything else? One other takeaway is I was looking at data from exit poll is that the poor working class, white poor working class, seem to have gravitated towards the Republicans, Donald Trump, and the educated middle class gravitated towards the Democrats, Kamala Harris. It's very, very strange that that in the American political system, those who are at the bottom usually tend to support the wealthy rather than those that would represent their class. And you brought up this idea of socialist, ideals, in which both political parties seem, to go after communism, socialism, which is not an issue in today's world. And even China is not a communist state anymore. But those are some of the realities. It's politics in the United States seems rather complex, complicated, and strange. Nevertheless, it's the reality. So we are going to talk now about the foreign policy of a Trump second term. And so let's first define what is foreign policy. The professor, Dr. Asquith Rose, what is foreign policy?
Well, foreign policy is anything outside of domestic policies. It has to deal with relations with other countries, actually. And this foreign policy and diplomacy is a course I normally teach. It has to do with relationship between two countries, how each other will, in trade, in economics, in whatever it is. But United States, I should say, no president has ever had a foreign policy tailored to one country in Latin America or the Caribbean. They all tailored the foreign policy to the region. So to say that Guyana will have, Trump will have a good relationship or Mark Rubio with Guyana, I think that's a myth. No country, except for one. Only country the United States had a foreign policy against and was a ridiculous foreign policy was Cuba. And that's to impose sanctions on Cuba. But the rest of the countries in the Caribbean and Latin America, like the Caribbean Basin Initiative, they put money in there and then they distribute it to different countries. Pompeo and these people went to Guyana for only one reason, because Exxon is there. If Exxon wasn't there, you will never find a Secretary of State in Guyana went to Guyana. Never. So we have got to be practical when we speak about Trump is going to do this to Guyana and whatever it is. Trump don't even know where Guyana is. And I will say this, Trump don't even know what Guyana has or what Guyana don't have. All you know, ExxonMobil is there, it has oil. So no president of the United States, and y'all can go back and look at this, has ever had a foreign policy directed to one country in the Caribbean. None. It's all go to the region. And the same is for Africa. And for anyone to tell me that Trump will have a foreign policy directed to Guyana, unless the world turns upside down tomorrow, then I'll believe that. But the bottom line to it all, Latin America and the Caribbean, those countries are meaningless to Trump. They are meaningless to Trump. Trump, as a matter of fact, when he was in office the last time, they had a Latin American envoy there, and Trump removed him from office. He don't need a need for that. So those countries are of little importance to Trump. And to say that Trump, the only time the United States will deal with countries directly is when they want to impose sanctions, like what they're doing to Venezuela right now. Okay? So we have got to be careful how we give out information. Anyone who knows foreign policy will tell you that the United States will never have any foreign policy tailored to one country in those regions because it's too small. I've been to Washington, D.C., took students there, and down in the State Department, they have desks there with computer and everything else, showing you what countries people are focusing on. And when it comes to the Caribbean, they lump all those countries together, except for Cuba. So I don't think United States, Trump, Kamala Harris, Biden, any one of them, Republican or Democrat, I'm neither one of those two parties, I'm an independent, will have any foreign policy tailored to those countries in those poor countries. As a matter of fact, Trump is the one who called them shithole countries. You all remember that? So those countries are meaningless to Trump. But I'll get more on that later on. I don't want to take up much time.
Okay, so to recap and to add to what Dr. Rose says about a country's foreign policy is an extension of the country's domestic policy. It's the policy having to do with all other countries and foreign entities, as well as international organizations. Every country has national interests, and its foreign policy is about its own national interests, regardless of whether it is security, oil, trade. It has to do with an extension of the country's national interests outside of its borders. And before we interrogate that additionally, let's ask Counsel Rusat Ramgopal if he has anything to add about foreign policy and what a Trump's foreign policy would look like. We heard a lot from Mr. Mike Singh already.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Yes, I would add on a few things to in response to Dr. Rose just now, and also earlier to you and Mr. Jonas. I would say I believe as the only person on this panel who has actually worked in the State Department. I worked in the State Department under the first Trump administration, and I worked in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor with a focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. I was perplexed by some of the comments Dr. Rose made just now. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Rose. He's a very distinguished individual, but he contradicted himself in the end there, because he said, look back at it, that no presidential administration has a policy focused on one specific country in that region, Latin America and the Caribbean, with the exception of Cuba. But then later on in his own statement, he mentioned the sanctions policy on Venezuela. The United States, under both the Bush administration and the Trump administration, had Venezuela-specific policies. And Dr. Rose additionally said that if it wasn't for Exxon and if it wasn't for the oil in Guyana, you would not have had Pompeo in Guyana. I would counter Dr. Rose by saying Guyana on the map is right next to Venezuela. That is one of the main reasons you saw the U.S. interest in what was going on in Guyana at the time, regardless of the oil. Guyana did not have the oil peak that we see now at the beginning of 2020, when the State Department was asking for radio access in Guyana in order to get the frequency and airwaves into Venezuela. The U.S. has an interest in Guyana, specifically, the Republicans have more of an interest on the Venezuela issue, but because it is next to Venezuela. And in terms of having a country-specific policy, yes, the U.S. had a country-specific policy on Cuba, which you mentioned, but they also had a country-specific policy on Venezuela. Look at the policy of John Bolton on Venezuela. Look at the policy of Mike Pompeo on Venezuela. They were very specific on Venezuela. So I was very surprised just now to hear Dr. Rose saying that the presidential administration does not have country-specific policies in that region, because anyone who can, the information out there, you can go Google it yourself, will see that is just false on the face of it. Now, going on to some different points that are being made. I mean, he said, Trump won't know where this is on a map. I mean, give Biden a map and see if he could find Guyana on it. I don't think he would at this point. But in addition, the president, and Dr. Rose knows, the president himself doesn't do the direct foreign policy all the time. That's why you have a State Department that's run by Secretary of State, and you have many different officials on it. Career officials, political officials, and even within the White House, you have a national security advisor and a whole other team of people that deal with these issues. Do you think that the president himself is dealing with those specific issues all the time, regardless of who the president is, whether it's Biden or Trump or Clinton or Obama? The president, yes, they will deal with foreign policy at times, but they are presiding over an administration with a State Department that's focused on that issue all the time. And I say that as an alumni of the State Department first Trump administration. Now, to some of the other points that were being made, I say that with all due respect to Dr. Rose, but I have some agreement and disagreement with my friend Mr. Timothy Jonas. I think that Mr. Jonas made some good points about the advertising and the money in politics. I think there's much too much money in American politics, that is focused on sound bites, as you said, that impact the election rather than focus on policy. But I think that the interesting contradiction to that is that if you look at both 2016 and this recent election in 2024, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris both spent much more money on advertising than the Trump campaign. Kamala Harris had $1 billion in this campaign cycle, yet she ended up on the losing side, Trump on the victorious side. So I think while writ large there is this issue of advertising and sound bites and money dominating the politics, I think that there is this interesting caveat that the unique character of Donald Trump and personality of Donald Trump, which dominates the political spectrum here at this point, either in favor of him or in opposition to him. I think that in its own way, mitigates the amount of ad money spent against him, and that's why he won both in 16 and 20, because he's just a unique figure, and that it will likely never be repeated again. I mean, if you look at other cycles with normal politicians, yes, the advertising and sound bites will dominate in the end, and it's a problem that we then focus on that in terms of rather than actual policy. But Mr. Jones was talking about how the Democrats or Republicans view socialism or things like that, and Dr. Bistrom was saying about the interesting thing about where the working class support goes. So in 2016, Trump won working class whites, which was, I think, was alluded to by Dr. Bisram, and that is a base that went for Clinton in the 90s and was once a traditional Democrat base. But in 2024, he didn't just win working class whites; he made significant inroads among working class minorities as well. That's why it was so close in some of the blue states. He only lost New Jersey by 5 points. He only lost New York by about 11 points in the end. He made significant inroads in minority communities. He actually won Latino men. I mean, when you look at the results, and that's why the most famous socialist in this country, or self-avowed socialist, Bernie Sanders, put a statement this afternoon in which he said, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned the working class would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is the Latino and Black working class as well." Can I just
jump in and say something?
Okay.
I wasn't in no contradiction. I said the United States don't have no foreign policy towards no country in the Caribbean, except when they want to sanction those countries. And when I say Trump don't know where Guyana is, I mean Biden, Clinton, Bush, all of them. I'm not only talking about Trump. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm nothing. So I'm not here to support one or the other. I'm talking independently, except for sanctions. That's the only time they deal directly with those countries. Now, the other thing I want to say is this. When it comes to foreign policy, the United States is as a zigzag foreign policy. And because China now is investing heavily in the Caribbean, they're trying, but they can't remove China from the Caribbean. China is the way forward to those countries, because the United States is not giving those countries enough foreign aid, period, but want to dictate policies to them. And it's not going to happen. So the bottom line to it all, to say that United States, as I contradict myself, no, I said except for sanctions. Now, when one talks about the economy, this economy, Trump won this election, and I analyze the election, and I will say this. I don't want to go into any details about this election, but Trump campaigned on the economy, which was bad. But if you go back and look at what the economy, Trump inherited a good economy from Barack Obama. And it went good until COVID came. And when COVID came, about that time, Trump about to leave office. And that's when the prices started to skyrocket and so forth. So we have to assess these things, that Trump didn't build an economy by himself. He inherited that from Obama. And when you look at Trump, he will tell you even today, when the stock market is up, he said that because that's of his economy. But when the stock market goes down, you don't see anything about it. But I'm not criticizing Trump for that. I'm not criticizing Biden or nobody. Biden did a very poor job on the border. There's no question about that. Biden did a very good job, a bad job on the economy. Cost of living was raising in this country. And he could have come and give the people some sort of a incentive for, like, it happened with COVID. People received money. Under a certain amount of money, receive money from them. I didn't receive any because my salary was way above that. But people received money, I think it was $12, one time $40. Biden should have done that to ease the pressure on the people. But Biden failed in that. And all of us getting old. But I think Biden age, I don't think he should have been president. And I would say the same thing for Trump. America should put a limit on presidency. When you reach 70 years old, that's it. You shouldn't run for no presidency. But that's only my take. That's not in the Constitution. So when you look at Trump's policies, you look at Biden policies, you look, it just tailored to what their needs are. And you, I don't know the gentleman's name, but you talked about Pompeo going to because of Venezuela. Venezuela's system was there since in the 50s and 60s. Did anyone in the Secretary of State went to Guyana? None.
Okay.
In the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s.
Okay,
did they
go? Okay, Doc. Let's move on now, right? So,
if I may, Dr. Bisram, just directly respond.
1 second, you'll get to come back, Rusev.
No, I was referred to directly, and I didn't get to.
All right,
I didn't interrupt Dr. Rose out of respect. So I'll just say I look back at.
You referred to me directly before, so it's only my time to respond to you.
Yes, and then you refer to me directly again.
Respond to you. Yeah. So we should not go in this exact manner.
Okay, I didn't realize you were moderating this evening.
Quickly, make your point, Rusev. Let's move on.
I'll just say you can look back at the tape. Dr. Rose said no country-specific policy except for Cuba. He's switching it now and saying except for sanctions.
Okay,
and he had
right. So, but in
and
general,
I'll just say in direct response to the last point that he made. He said about Venezuela being the same since the 50s. No, Venezuela had a distinct change in the late 1990s when Hugo Chavez went in, and that is what led to a change in U.S. foreign policy directly to country-specific Venezuela under both the Bush administration and the Trump administration thereafter. So, that's
okay.
Just a quick point.
So just to make one point.
That thing was.
I didn't realize we're going zigzag. I thought it was zigzag, Dr. Rose, right?
The point has been made. But let's move on from the issue now. Look. Anyone who studied American foreign policy and has been looking at the functioning of Congress, Joe Biden, when he was quite young and was heading the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was very, very sharp. Was one of the sharpest senators that I ever came across in my readings and studies of United States foreign policy. We all age, as Rose said, and the poor fella, he has lost some of his skills and debating skills as well in foreign policy as well as in domestic policy. Now, look, in terms of Guyana, yes, the United States is interested in Guyana because of oil and because of security issues vis-a-vis Venezuela. But this Trump administration is still going to be focused on Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. Those will be the three main
exactly.
This Trump administration in terms of the region. Of course, China will always be a challenge, and China is challenging the United States in Latin America and Caribbean. But Trump is not going to take that very easily. Mike Singh, anything, and let's be brief, please, so we can have senior counsel give his input.
Yes, I mean, thank you. For the foreseeable future, you will see the Trump administration focusing on U.S. leadership in the world, global trade. I may also wish to add the war in Ukraine, NATO. You need to spend more, beef up your security, and of course, competition with China, which brings me to the Caribbean. There are a number of island states in the Caribbean that are in bed with China, that are in bed with Iran. Venezuela is a parking lot for over 3,000 members of the Iranian Republican National Guard. Rusat knows this. In fact, my mentor is Elliot Abrams. You would have worked alongside him. And he's gone to great pains to talk about Venezuela. You've got Hamas, you've got Hezbollah, you've got the Iranians in Venezuela. If or when Venezuela attacks Guyana, these entities will come over the border and take Guyana. The US will have strategic engagement with Guyana because of energy security, maintaining the peace and stability in the neighborhood, and Guyana is well counseled to allow the building of an American military base there because you can't depend on the GDF to even swat a fly. Guyana has large amounts of strategic minerals, as I have said, that are very important to the entire mobile communication sector and high-speed computing. Talk about AI data centers. The cost of building one of those centers, it's over $1 billion US. And Guyana has those minerals like Argentina, like Chile, that China already has its hands on. So it behoves me to say that US foreign policy towards Latin America is going to be a stick and a carrot, believe it or not. And those countries who do not want to toe the line, I'm perfectly happy to champion regime change because this is America's backyard. And if you want to enjoy the protective umbrella of the United States and access to US markets and free movement of people and goods and trade, there must be reciprocity, give and take. People in the Caribbean, as far as I'm concerned, they don't need aid. Aid, I can tell you, is a crutch. People need to compete. They need to be able to trade. And the only way you can compete and be able to produce goods and services of good quality is to invest in your people, invest in infrastructure, not just roads, not just ports, but digital infrastructure, because the entire world is moving towards digital transformation. Look at NVIDIA, a US company established by a Chinese immigrant from Taiwan, a Taiwanese immigrant. Today, they've overtaken Apple as the world's most valued company. The NVIDIA GPU chips are the fastest in the world. Without those, you can't build a data center. Guyana and many countries in the region need to start investing in people, because intellectual capital is the new wealth of the 21st century. I urge our readers and everyone here to read Alvin Toffler's seminal piece, Future Shock, which was published more than 50 years ago. And it talks about those countries and societies that can harness data and in the end will be economically competitiveness. Will have that economic competitiveness to their advantage. Having said that, invest in people, not just roads. If you have a brain drain, as we've seen in Guyana and Suriname and elsewhere, how are you going to compete? And for the record, President Trump said he's in favor of immigration, but it must be orderly, it must be legal, and it must be well structured. And I think it's about time we build that wall. And my suggestion or question to the learned Dr. Rose, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
All right, so that's a good question. We'll come and discuss that.
Thank you.
But before we get to the senior counsel, Timothy Jonas, gentlemen, I'm 64 years old, and there are people who are much, much older than me. I don't think that I am as mentally active and more cognitive and smarter than those in the 70s and 80s. So I don't want to put an age limit on which people can serve as president of Guyana or any part of the world and in the United States. Certainly there is no age bar in the United States, and it probably will never be. Yes, age was a factor for Joe Biden. He didn't show that he was mentally active, mentally cognitive, mentally with the mental acuity necessary to run another administration. And that is what led to Ms. Harris becoming the candidate replacing him after the selection of the nominee through the primary process. Mr. Jonas?
I feel like I'm bombarded with sound bites, Bish. So let me start with all these sound bites we're talking about that I've been bombarded with by people who clearly have taken them in and digested them and bought them over completely. Before I go there, though, I want to respectfully agree with Rusat in his assessment of what Dr. Rose said, but not for the reasons he gave. I want to give some examples rather than just speaking in generalities. I don't think any Guyanese will dispute the involvement of the US in Guyana politics, cooperating with Britain to get rid of Cheddi Jagan's PPP back in the 60s before independence. Pressing Burnham when he began his dictatorial oppressive regime and excluding Guyana economically. Landing via Carter in 1992 to insist with Hoyt that we have free elections. And now slapping the PPP on the wrist with the more obvious acts of corruption and being there in the background to show support for Exxon when Venezuela threatens. Now, this is just Guyana's example. So I present those examples to counter the suggestion that there is no specific foreign policy directed at individual countries in the Caribbean. Everyone remembers Ortega in Nicaragua. Batiste, Castro's predecessor, a strong man who was supported by the Americans. So if you look at the examples throughout Latin America, Grenada, when America interfered, Morris Bishop. I mean, we have so many examples of specific policies in specific countries. Where I will acknowledge what Asquith is saying, is that the fact is that these individual countries are so tiny and minuscule, both in terms of military weight, economic weight, that they don't register on the radar with the American public. And indeed, none of those presidents know how to pronounce Guyana. Personally, they don't know about it. But Rusat is also correct that there is a clear and professional State Department that monitors closely from the time Teddy Roosevelt talked about, I'm sorry, not Teddy Roosevelt, Monroe talked about this is our backyard. So it has been closely monitored. Now, Rusat misunderstood what I said, and he introduced the subject of money and pointed out that Kamala had much more money and still lost. I wasn't speaking about money. I was speaking about the fact that the politicians, in addressing the public, do not condescend to real topics, but advertise. So their method of communication is in sound bites, which is only in generic advertising. And I want to give you some examples I've heard tonight. I hear my friend Mike Singh use the expression safety through strength. Now, if you analyze that expression, it's totally meaningless. What it means is I got the biggest stick, and therefore I'm safe because I'm strong. Now, Teddy Roosevelt said that back in the day, speak softly, carry a big stick. Another nice soundbite that's memorable 100 years later. But when you take these sound bites, they are meaningless because what it boils down to, in Mike Singh's own words, he talks about fair trade. But then he also says you have to force these non-compliant countries to get rid of China. Now, those are inconsistent statements. Either we have fair trade or we force people to do what we want using our big stick. You can't get both. And right now, we have, in his words, forcing these countries to remove China. That's a problem. He says India is to be courted. But let me tell you something. You may remember during COVID, the large pharmaceuticals had patented the drugs that every single person in the world had to buy and use. And when India said, we have a cheap prototype, we've gone and done our thing and got a cheap alternative, those same large pharmaceuticals, assisted by the lobby group in the States, prevented that from happening because you had to pay the money for those drugs. India's is very close to China in its ability to reproduce cheaply. And nobody's going to be courting India and China for that. In fact, India and China might be forced by the people with the big stick to toe the line, because as they can make something more cheaply, they are at a competitive advantage and there's a problem. So we have to look at specifics rather than buying into sound bites. Another point that was made, which I found interesting, and this was you, Doc. You talked about Latino men and the fact that a higher proportion of Black Americans, Latino Americans, working class, went with Trump. I think that we have to revisit those demographics because we use those traditional demographics. We know since JFK and Martin Luther King, Black Americans go liberal, they go Democrat. Not anymore. But because traditionally and historically we look at Afro-American as a group that is a single political unit leaning Democrat, we think that that's still the case. But I want to give you the English comparison that when West Indians and Africans and Indians from the subcontinent, including Pakistan, were going to India, were going to England in the 50s and 60s, the people who protested the most were the ones who saw them as a competitive threat on the job market, the blue-collar people. When you speak to Latino men in the working class in the States, and they're seeing these immigrants coming and taking over their jobs, they are no longer a consolidated group lining up behind Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, saying, we are going with the Democrats because they're liberal and they got welfare and they're looking after us. They are now saying, no, these folk, and it's interesting, I'm speaking to immigrants right now, and I know that you have the experience, that you speak to your own kit and kind, and they are very conservative. in their economic outlook, their social outlook. They're very conservative. They came, but they want to close the door behind them. They don't want anybody else to come in because any more folk coming in threaten their jobs. So they're happy to hear Trump say, no, 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 we got to regulate this thing, because they don't like seeing folks coming in hungry and willing to work 3 and 4 jobs and therefore outcompete them. So I think that it's important to try to restructure the automatic demographic groups that we've been looking at for the past 60 years, because I don't think that those groups resonate as clearly as they do anymore. Certainly, the intellectuals, the urban folk, the university educated folk, those are groups that I'm sure you will agree with me, they tended to go with Kamala. Certainly, the Bible Belt groups went with Trump. But I think we have to be more careful in how we identify the demographics. Now, finally, if we are talking about American foreign policy, y'all, this thing doesn't change. And again, I agree with what Rusat said. Any country's foreign policy is based on the self-interest of that country. That's all it's about. It's not about good and bad. Now, fortunately for us, I believe that the Americans came to the conclusion that it is in their interest to have stable democracies in their part of the world. And therefore, they support democratic processes, unless, like in the 60s, the democracy would produce a socialist outcome, in which case they tended to interfere. But overall, that's what they wanted. They wanted economic support, because the fact is, down south here, we tend to grow agricultural products. We're not a threat to them. We're not going and compete with microchips or automobiles. So they can use our economy and nurture our economy in a way that creates a symbiosis, not a symbiosis, a dependency that we got to sell to them. But don't be fooled. You talk about free trade. If you go to look at Puerto Rico, you will see that Puerto Rico has exclusive access to American markets for so many agricultural products grown in the West Indies because of tariffs, that America does not join the international tariff treaty arrangements, because if they did that, their own agricultural products would be at risk. So let's talk about fear. Let's talk about self-interest. And let us try to understand that it is in our interest to cooperate with that country that has the biggest stick. First of all, because we have no choice. But second of all, because I don't think it hurts us to do so. I think that in doing so, our prosperity will increase, because they are looking for friends and allies. They are afraid of China. They are afraid of India. They're afraid of Iran. And when I say afraid, I know they have the big stick. But I'm talking about afraid of the fact that China has already demonstrated how quickly and easily and insidiously it can get into the economy of a country and therefore be a threat right in America's backyard. It is in our interest, I think, to keep America good, because then they keep us good. I do agree with the one thing that Mike Singh said, which is we need to encourage greater American investment in our land space. And I have no problem with a military installation under contract, rented, where it is an arrangement of mutuality and protection is there. But other than that, I'm afraid I disagreed with much of what was said.
Well, thank you for those clarifications. And yes, you're right. The key term is self-interest. All countries have self-interest. The self-interest of some countries doesn't really matter. Small countries don't really matter. It's as you said, it's the countries that carry the big stick, and America does have the big stick that can dominate any part of the world at any time. You did mention the minority support for the various political parties. We must not forget also that Guyanese, substantial numbers of them, Indo-Guyanese in particular, perhaps half or more than half, voted for Trump. Indian Americans who used to be Democrats have become very, very conservative and swung towards Donald Trump. Over half Indian Americans voted for Donald Trump. So yes, the demographics have changed considerably, in how they affiliate with the two dominant political parties in the United States. Let's give the floor now to Rusat Ramgopal.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Mr. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Jonas said, and I apologize for interpreting the advertising when you said that earlier as to mean more related to the campaign finance. You can understand why I interpreted that way, but I do agree with a lot of what you're saying about the sound bites and how it goes that way. I would like to focus some remarks back towards the overarching topic of the panel discussion, which is what does this win mean for the Caribbean and the wider world? Now, in terms of what it means for the Caribbean and the wider world as a Trump foreign policy, I think one of the criticisms of the Biden foreign policy is that there was a certain display of weakness or lack of deterrence, in the sense that many foreign policy experts as well would argue that his weakness in response to the initial threat of Russian aggression in Ukraine somewhat invited that aggression. If you look back, he famously said, well, if a minor incursion happened, the U.S. wouldn't really do anything. Then obviously a incursion did occur, and then we have the lasting pulse, the war in Ukraine lasting for the 2 years since, and a sort of haphazard policy from the Biden administration that many can't see where it's directly leading to in the end. I don't think even people working within the Biden administration could tell you where it's leading. Obviously, we see the war ongoing in the Middle East, where simultaneously you have them saying, well, we sympathize with Palestinian suffering, but then sending more and more arms towards Israel at the same time. So the inconsistency of the Biden administration foreign policy leads to instability and a lack of deterrence. I think that whether one agrees or disagrees with the foreign policy of Donald Trump and who his administration will be incoming, I think there will be a greater sense of deterrence, as there was in his first administration as well. There is a old foreign policy theory called the madman theory, which was first talked about when Richard Nixon was the president, which is that the fact that you may have a madman in charge deters potential aggressors. And that was the case during the Nixon era, and some would argue that was the case during the Trump era as well, to the point that when Trump was there, because there was a sense of fear of Trump, fear of the madman, that's why you had, for example, Kim Jong-un going to the negotiating table with Donald Trump during that first administration. In terms of how that would deal particularly with the Caribbean or Guyana, obviously we had the Venezuela threat in recent times in the past year, around this time last year. December was the peak of that. And obviously the U.S. had some response. Blinken made statements, Biden made statements, but we didn't really see an active U.S. role as much as we would see otherwise. That those talks, in fact, were mediated by CARICOM leaders like Ralph Gonzalez and others, rather than say the U.S. Secretary of State, as you may have otherwise expected in a different time, in a different era. So I think that the Trump administration coming back will have more deterrence towards threats of instability in the region, like Venezuela-Guyana border dispute. I think that there'll be more deterrence there in that regard, and I think that there would be a country-specific policy towards Venezuela that would contribute to that establishment of deterrence. I think in particular for Guyana, a lot of people would talk about Guyana leading up to an election year, and the results of the U.S. election have an impact on how we would look towards the Guyana election 2025. Given what we saw in the election of 2020. When the election of 2020 occurred, Mike Pompeo eventually came out afterwards and had threatened personal sanctions against members of the Granger government in the lead up to them eventually stepping aside. Pompeo also later came to Guyana after the change of government, and that formulated a lot of minds one way or the other on how the relationship is between that Republican administration and the PP government that came in. Leading Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries made other statements, and some would say anti-democratic statements, during that period of the elections process. For all that Hakeem Jeffries talks about respecting democracy in America, Hakeem Jeffries did not seem to have the greatest respect for the democratic process in Guyana at that time. And had the Democrats won the House yesterday, which a lot of people aren't talking about, Hakeem Jeffries would have been the next Speaker of the House. And had Hakeem Jeffries been the Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful positions in the United States government, in the lead up to the 2025 elections in Guyana, I think that we would have seen a different effect in the U.S.-Guyana relationship And a lot of people, without me going into all the detail and taking up unnecessary time, would know the strain and tension that there is between Hakeem Jeffries and the current government in Guyana, based on previous comments and statements that he's made. Letitia James is another one who was a prominent Democrat official here, who made certain controversial statements about Guyana and about the internal Guyanese political forces. Letitia James today now has to eat her own words and congratulate the man that she once tried to put in jail. So had the result gone the other way, we would be talking about Hakeem Jeffries and Letitia James being emboldened, and that would have a different effect for Guyana. Then today we're talking about Trump winning, the potential of the Pompeo-style policy returning, and what that means for Guyana instead.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't think Mike Pompeo is returning to this administration. Incoming.
No, I said Pompeo-style policy.
Yeah. I'm just saying that. Mike Singh.
Well, I like to reiterate once again, the U.S. will be dealing with the challenges of Iran in its backyard, China, and of course Russia, because they've all got a presence in Venezuela. Venezuela remains an existential threat to Guyana. It's also been a threat to the democratic process in Colombia. President Petro is no friend of Guyana. He's in bed with the narcos and with the Maduros. And Ortega is no paragon of virtue. I've never seen a belly dancer like Ralph Gonsalves, who took President Irfanali as a sacrificial lamb to the failed Argyle consensus. So to put it bluntly, Guyana needs to dip into its pockets, get rid of the labaria in its pockets, and spend its oil wealth on beefing up its national security. And it can do that by buying US military training, hardware, and what have you, and not be dependent on Southcom to help it police its borders and protect itself. Guyana really needs to step up and spend some of that huge amounts of oil and gas revenue to give its defense and security forces the necessary tools to protect what they have. There's this failed thinking in Guyana that if Venezuela invades Guyana, that will never happen. America will come like the cavalry. Well, Kuwait thought that Iraq will never invade it, and Iraq did. So Guyana is just a sitting duck in that, self-righteous thinking of theirs that, we have the oil, we have the gas, America is going to protect us. But we have an America First policy. My recommendation to the powers that be in Guyana, become an associate member of NATO so you can get protection under the NATO umbrella like Argentina once had and Colombia as well. Country's got wealth, it needs to spend more on its people, better infrastructure, we need better rule of law in Guyana. And as Roussat said, there will be strategic engagement. And because America's got too much to lose, and we simply cannot afford to have 10 million persons crossing into the US. We don't know who they are. We can't vet them. That's a national security nightmare. I can't wait for the Trump administration to start rounding up these illegals and sending them right back to where they came from, because I'm all about putting America first and making America great again. And I thank God every day for the opportunities afforded me by the United States of America. What my own land of birth didn't afford me, the US gave me. So I'm not about to renounce the US, even to become president of Guyana. Thank you.
We do have a lot of money coming into Guyana. I don't think we have unlimited money to do all of the kind of things that are being suggested. But certainly I am in agreement with Timothy Jonas that we should have some kind of contractual treaty arrangement with the United States to protect us from any external threats that we ourselves really cannot handle. It should not be an exploitative arrangement, but certainly a mutually beneficial one. The Americans certainly want our oil, and we want their protection. Yes, Mike, quickly.
We can do like the Saudis, pay a private military contractor like Eric Prince Blackwater to come there and train the GDF and protect us.
I don't think the GDF will ever be trained to take on an
no,
external threat.
they can be trained, but if you brought in an Eric Prince,
and we don't have the human resources for
but
a
you do
defense
like the Saudis and the UAE have done in Abu Dhabi. They contracted Mr. Prince, and he's there safeguarding the peace. He helped to defeat the Somali pirates, and
the mere presence of the United States in Guyana is itself a deterrent. Timothy Jonas.
Bishop, you passed me twice, you know.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Ask it, you, and then Timothy Jonas. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Ask it. Go ahead.
I just want to make some very brief comments because this is not a way to discuss anything, Lauren. There's four of us here. That big stick method everyone talks about America having, it's waning. BRICS is now coming into play. And you watch that BRICS movement. That's all I will say for now. Number two, why is it if there's an election problem in Guyana, like what happened in 2020, and I disagree with what APNU did, but why America has to impose sanctions on anybody there? What's America's business there? If there's an election problem in the United States, can Guyana impose sanctions on the United States? This is your countries ought to be independent, and its sovereignty must be respected. Not because you're big America and what have you, you can come and tell us what to do or tell us what no. So anybody who promoting that America should impose sanctions on Guyanese because of the internal election process, I'm saying to them, that's not foreign policy. That's using advantage in taking advantage in a poor country. And I never said this before. I never promote myself on anything. But I wrote over 28 papers that are published in reputable journals. 3 of them based on the United States foreign policy. And I went to the State Department on each time and asked for American foreign policy in the Caribbean and Latin America. You know what I was told? Oh, we're supporting them to help them with the drug trade because we don't want the drugs to come to the States. I wrote another book, one of my 5 textbooks on Caribbean. It's called Dependency and Socialism in the Modern Caribbean. All in Amazon, y'all can read it there. Super intervention in Guyana, Jamaica, and Grenada. I did the same thing and the same question. I just finished a book that was published in July of this year. It's called A Race to the Finish Line. The election of Barack Hussein Obama as the first Black president of the United States. I spent 3 weeks at the State Department. Give me Obama's foreign policy in the Caribbean. The same thing you're telling me, oh, we support the Caribbean in drugs and so forth, for help them, patrol the seas and so forth. They have no foreign policy. The State Department could not have given me any, and I spoke to 2 senior, one was the Assistant Secretary of State. He said, well, this is what we have. When I reviewed the paper, I said, this has to be with drugs. He said, yeah, that's our main thing because we helping them protect the waters from the drug lords. So when they want to talk about American foreign policy in the Caribbean, I'm saying to you, the books I wrote, they've all been peer reviewed by professors in the same field. So I'm not talking of something off my head. I went and I did the research. And I'm not getting anything about American foreign policy in the Caribbean. Now, quickly, this Caribbean American backyard and so forth, that's an old cliche. And if you're from the Caribbean, you should never allow to say something like that we're in America's backyard. So who is in America's front yard? Why we got to be in the backyard? Why? Because America wanted to tell us what to do? We must stop allowing countries, and this is why I like about BRICS and these other countries, because you don't want nobody to continue to police you to the extent where they're telling you what to do internally into your country, telling you how to run your internal affairs, how to run your elections. We need protection at the border to help us with Venezuela, quite agree. But that doesn't mean that you have to treat us as a little boy or a little kid. We should be proud of our Guyana for them to stand up and say, no, America, we don't need you to do X, Y, and Z in our country. or don't promote that policy outside? I don't understand how proud can anyone be to tell me that we're in America's backyard. So who is in America's front yard? Why we got to be in the back all the time? So my question to everybody is that I don't buy into those old cliches. I see a country as an independent country, as a serving nation. United Nations Charter tells you all countries are equal under the United Nations Charter of Rights. Therefore, America has to respect those countries. If we take America like Argentina a few years ago, had a trade problem with the United States, took the United States to the World Trade Organization, because the United States knew it was going to lose the case, it withdraw, never tentative. But it still is telling Venezuela you must accept the ICJ decision. I'm not saying Venezuela shouldn't. I'm a Guyanese. Venezuela is supposed to accept it. But America has no, it don't have that type of thing to tell another country what to do. Because right internally, Trump is saying that elections are rigged in the United States. Elections are this. Until now, the last election was rigged in the United States. Did any one of those countries can come and tell America what to do as to stop rigged elections? So when we talk about the United States, we put the United States on a pedestal as if it's a God-sent country to save humanity in the world. The United States had slaves for umpteen years, worked them to nothing. And today they're treating blacks as second class and third class. So nobody could tell me about America. America has a dark past, and they still want to produce that dark past. And I'm saying to everybody, it's about time you stop putting America on a pedestal to say America is this. I'm living in the States, but my first country came to live in Canada. I lived in France. I lived in Britain. I came to the States because I'm teaching here. But I don't praise America for no way, shape, or form, because America don't recognize me as a black person to give me equal opportunities. There's still institutional racism prevalent in every institution in the United States, public and private, every one of them. They take people in by tokenism. If the State Department, let's employ 20 blacks. But who in the State Department more? Majority of whites, and whites got the top positions. We start with the most administration. They put 1 and 2 blacks there, and that's all. So when we talk about this United States and say United States is this, no, I don't want anybody to tell me that the United States is a godsend. United States got no right to tell Guyanese what to do with the internal elections. Let them solve their problems themselves. Because Guyana can't tell you. Another thing I want to say, if somebody, about 2 or 3 years ago, somebody committed a crime in Guyana, not in Guyana, I think was in Brazil, an American, and he flee and went to the United States. I think it was rape. And the Brazilian asked them to send the person back for trial in Brazil, a white American. You know what the United States says? No, send us the evidence and we're going to try them in the States because you have a kangaroo court system. Why America is taking people out of the country, like from Gandhi and so forth? Why America has to impose sanctions on Mohammed for? Why? Mohammed rob America of anything? Why America telling you, oh, you can't come there because you did X, Y, and Z? I'm saying to you all, stop this thing by promoting America. America is a satanic, it's Sodom and Gomorrah of itself. Look at American policies. Go back to history. Look at American policies towards minorities, towards brown and black people. Y'all talk about immigration coming from Latin America and from Mexico. They took half of Mexico in the Mexican-American War in 1849. And when you look at America again, 7 million whites came in from Europe and other countries. They're not talking about those whites. Trump himself said he preferred whites to come from Sweden into the United States, not from the Caribbean or Latin America. So don't tell me that America is still one of the most racist countries in the world. I lived in France. I didn't see racism to the extent where it's at the United States. In Britain, it's the same thing. In Canada, it's the same thing. America, don't tell me about America. Because I get angry when people talk about America is this, America is this, America give me this. America give me anything. I came here, work, and I studied. Well, I came and studied, and that's it. America can give me anything. What I got to achieve on my own. So when people talk about the United States, we must talk with it. We must relate the facts. Relate the facts. America got no right to tell Guyanese what to do in internal affairs when it comes to elections. No country, because Guyana can't tell America what to do. Anybody commit a crime, American go there and commit a crime and fly the country out. Get that American to come back to be tried in Guyana. Never happened. But if a Guyanese commit a crime in the States and flew to Guyana, Guyana is going to send him back to the States for trial.
Okay, we just have like about 14 minutes remaining. I certainly
okay,
some of the points that you made have merit. Certainly, BRICS is a larger GDP, has a larger GDP than the G7. I believe over time, Donald Trump is going to put an end to the war. I believe Putin is going to be re-invited to join the G7 to become the G8. After which India may be asked to become G9 and China will become G10, and so you'll have these 10 dominant nations that will probably control the world economically. I certainly think Timothy Jonas has a lot to contribute to some of the points that you just made, Dr. Rose. Senior Counsel?
I was disappointed to hear that tirade from Dr. Rose.
Why?
I have no doubt, having said all of that, that he will now be anxious to come back to Guyana, to take up work at the University of Guyana and immerse himself in Guyanese society and all the good things that are happening here. I had blackout for an hour at my office this afternoon. My internet was not working, so I'm now using my data on my phone.
Ask Dr. Martin what to do for you, G. Ask Dr. Paloma Martin. And I get an organization in Guyana, Mr. Jonas, and I go there 3 times a year.
Interrupt you.
No, go ahead. But I just want to tell you that.
Yeah, it's an interruption.
Yeah, sorry.
So of my father's 8 siblings, 7 of them migrated to the States, and his mother had their families in the States. All except one died in the States. The last one still alive in the States. I don't think we can trash the States. The fact is, it is still the land of milk and honey. It is still seen as the place to go. But I also will hasten to say nobody here in this forum has tonight pretended to give any moral authority to the Americans. We all agreed that their foreign policy is self-interest, and they have devised means to exclude large superpowers from their backyard. And what I'm hearing here makes me smile, because I'm listening to men of the pen. I'm listening to men who obviously never been in a schoolyard fight before. Because let me tell you something, there's nothing fancy about this foolishness. If you're strong and I'm weak, you win. America is strong. We are weak. There are no rules. You're right. America is not part of the ICJ. They chose not to be because they can. Donald Trump, the same Donald Trump that someone in this forum earlier said we should be joining NATO, threatened to leave NATO, talked about leaving NATO, which would cause NATO to collapse. We are talking about self-interest, not moral authority. America received a surprise on 9/11. Their response was to go and extract a man from a country and kill him and dispose of his body in the Mediterranean Sea. So why did they do it? Because they could, and because their population was clamoring for retribution, for justice. So when a Guyanese criminal went to Trinidad and was renditioned by those same Americans and taken to the States and put in jail, you know why it happened? Because they can. So don't let's talk foolishness about we're sovereign and we got rights and blah, blah, blah. Because they can and we can't. And it is that simple. So when we say we got oil money, and therefore we got to spend that oil money on the GDF, what we buying planes? Because nobody in the GDF can fly any jets. We buying tanks because nobody in the GDF can drive or maintain any tanks. So don't let's be men of the pen and try to speculate on things beyond our competence. Let us agree that there is no moral authority here, but the law among nations is the law of might. It is the law of power. And if we want to sit here and say to the states, the people who've had the big stick for the last 200 years, to hell with you, we continue to work with China, well, we got some major problems coming in. And I know we like to talk academically in theory about BRICS. Russia, Brazil, South Africa, China. I ask any of you gentlemen to talk to your family members and ask them when they save $1 and they buy in foreign currency, if they buy Brazilian currency or Chinese currency or US currency. You know, it is easy in an academic dispute to run away from common sense, but in that way is problems. Because let me tell you, I will be buying US currency if God blesses me and I ever have a spare dollar. But because I live in Guyana, not in the States, the land of milk and honey, spare dollars tend to be scarce, notwithstanding gas and oil. So let's be realistic in our approach, and rather than talk in hypotheticals or rely on personal slights, because it is true that Black Americans have been excluded and are marginalized. It is true. But don't go there and quarrel with the people. Stay home.
You're telling Americans who are born here to stay home?
So, gentlemen, we just got a few minutes left, so let me give each one of you a minute, to make any concluding remarks. We'll go with Rusat, Mike Singh, Dr. Asquith, and Timothy.
Thank you, Dr. Bisram. Yes, it's been a pleasure to be on this panel this evening. I'll just say some final remarks in response to some of the things. But I think this is a very interesting topic to continue with discussions on in the future. On the point of BRICS, I do think that it is a significant one that the future administration will have to look at, because when America has made foreign policy mistakes in the past, for example, we had to respond to 9/11, we did the war in Afghanistan, but the war in Iraq was a terrible failure that never should have been done in the first place. And as a result of that, a lot of America's global credibility, took a hit, understandably so. And currently with the foreign policy of this past administration, the Biden administration, in Ukraine and in the Middle East, our global reputation has taken a hit in some corners, and that will understandably lead to some countries wanting to look towards alternatives, look towards BRICS, and that is something that it should not be overestimated, but should not be underestimated either. We have to be cautious of that, and I think that the Trump administration is wary of that, and that will be top of mind for that going forward. But as Mr. Jonas rightly said, the most powerful U.S. weapon is the U.S. dollar, and you can see the news today in the Financial Times. Following the news of Trump's election, the dollar saw its largest gains in 8 years. So America still has a lot of power, and as Dr. Rose knows, when a country is a great power, that allows them to do things that other countries cannot do, and that allows a country like America or China or other countries to then wade into the affairs of other countries in ways that smaller countries simply cannot do. That is a tale as old as time. That was true when Britain was a global power. It's true when America is a global power. But I was surprised to hear some of the points that Dr. Rose said. I mean, comparing us to Britain and France. Britain and France started the whole colonial system and were some of the most racist countries in history. Look, no country is perfect. America is not perfect by any means, but America, at the same time, I'm reminded, while Dr. Rose was saying, America is a country that's so great that even those who hate it won't want to leave it. So on that note, say thank you to all who participate in this discussion. It's been a fine panel to be a part of, and it's fun being a guest instead of a moderator for a change.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to have you as a guest. Mike Singh?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bisram. I do agree with the Timothy Jonas. When he talks about the GDF, they don't have the manpower, but Guyana has money. It faces existential threats, and it's better off going and getting some private military contractors. It's not the first time a nation state has used private military contractors. During the American Revolutionary War, Great Britain hired the Hessian warriors from Germany who came and fought on the side of the British. So Guyana has money, can hire Blackwater, you can hire Eric Prince, and they will get the job done. They will not be retreating and playing the fool in the jungle. Just a few days ago, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, their station in the southern Rupununi, the staff were held up by bandits from Brazil with guns, and they were kidnapped and taken across the border as hostages. The gold was stolen. And this is not an isolated case. Guyana cannot adequately, if at all, police its borders. So it needs to put its hands in the pocket, get rid of the snake in the pocket, dear Minister Ashley Singh, and call up Mr. Prince with your president's permission and strike a deal. You can call me. Mr. Prince is my friend, and I happily put the deal together. But I'm not a socialist. I'm not going to do it for a ham sandwich. There has to be some rewards. I like to tell people I'm a hired gun. Good, bad, or ugly, you have a problem, I've got a solution. And, Lusat, you have a great future ahead of you. I hope to see you one day as a Secretary of State or even head of the CIA for the United States of America. You remind me a lot of myself. And you're a great young man and a young adult, and I'm so proud of you, of what you have done. Dr. Rose, I don't know why you hate America this much. If America is so bad, you're welcome to take your Georgie bundle and ship out. I'm pretty sure you can go to Moscow, and the comrades there will welcome you. And Timothy Jonas, I'm always impressed by your grasp of reality, and I wish you the best there at Anog in the fight. And I thank you all for having me.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think Rousset desires to be a Secretary of State or CIA, but if he gets it, I'm sure he will take it. But certainly, I do hope that Rousset returns to the State Department or even the White House, the job he once held, or even a promotion, higher position.
I meant in the future, he has great potential.
Yes, and indeed he's a fine.
And we should be proud of him, and we should support him.
Very talented erudite as well. Dr. Ascot Rose, your final comments, please.
Not because someone relate what America is all about, they hate America. And for you to tell me that I should take my Georgia bomb and go any place, that's a blatant insult. I can insult you back the same way, but I will not do it. I don't get personal with people. We're discussing a topic here. And what I'm saying to everybody is that don't tell me America because it's big and powerful, should be allowed to do any and everything. We see empires come and go, and America is waning in its power. So I'm saying to you what the facts are, and I just do research to get the facts. I don't only come and talk on what it is. I do research, write, and publish. And when I get the results, that's what I do. So don't tell me take my Georgie bond and go back to America. And don't tell me that I'm angry. I'm relating the facts to you. I've lived in America. I've crawled up to the system. I'm a professor here. I was an associate dean at the University of Albany. I had to walk away from it. I went to the University of Florida International University as a tenured professor. I had to walk away from it because of the prejudice there. A black man should not get those positions. You all have been in the positions I've been in. So when I talk about America, I know what I experienced in America. I said I never experienced this in Canada. I lived most of my life in Canada from 8 years old before coming to the States. Went to France, never experienced these things. Taught at the University of Bordeaux, never experienced these things. Taught at London School of Economics, never experienced these things. I taught in South Korea on teaching Fulbright scholarship. So I've traveled the world, in Brazil as well, Sao Paulo University. So I've traveled the world and I've done stuff. So don't tell me that America is this and America is that, and I'm angry. And the dollar is there because it's waning too. Bitcoin and the gold standard coming back. You can use, or people use their credit card, but the American dollar is there. But a time will come when you'll see that you can use other currency as well. So my take is, when you put America on a pedestal as if America is a saint, I have problems with that. That's all I'm saying. I have problems with that. No country is a saint.
I do agree with you, and I don't think anyone is saying that. Yes, America has its issues and problems and so forth.
Well, he
But
told
still,
me to take my Georgia bundle leave.
it
If I
is, it
stop
is,
around to America.
yeah, I don't think he meant it in those direct words.
What he meant? Yes, if I don't like America, I can take my Georgie bundle and leave. I don't know what the hell a Georgie bundle is, but I can take it and leave. What he meant? Anyway, go ahead.
Most certainly, America remains the most dominant power today. The US dollar remains the most dominant currency. It will remain so, I think, for the foreseeable future. I certainly don't see the yuan or the rupee or the Russian ruble replacing the dollar, in spite of what several people in Guyana often talked about, that nonsensical idea. So let's close off with Timothy Jonas.
I don't think I want to respond directly to what everyone else said, but I would like to take a point of order, Doc. And I think in this forum, if you have speakers, we need to be on a level playing field. We all need to be equal. So I want to offer an apology to Mr. Rusat Ramgopal, because I took the liberty of calling him Rusat. And he responded to me as Mr. Jonas, which puts us on an unequal playing field. And I did also notice that he is one of the smartest contributors on this program, but is not acknowledged that way. And I think that going forward, we have to have a point of order. So I will say to him now, and to Asquith and to Mike, that either we agree to call each other by first names, or we use the honorifics. But we need to have a level playing field in our discussions.
So thank you very much, gentlemen. We have run past our time. It's now 8:33. So I again thank you, viewers, for joining us tonight, viewers and listeners, for watching Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noor Singh, and with Mr. Devin Bisoon joining us tonight as a technical operator.